Is that an official warning?
New term, new challenges, new series. Hope and Glory returns Wednesday, 4th of October on BBC One.
Reasons your heart rate increases.
Severe anxiety.
An after shock.
Overexcitement. Emotional conflict. A sudden rush of adrenaline.
Hi, I'm Mr. Adams.
The new series of Holby City, Pulses Are Racing, starts October the 5th on BBC One.
Exposing the truth now on BBC One, Panaroma, with Jane Corbin.
"60 days and counting. A deadline hangs over a beleaguered Mr. Blair.
We cannot, and we will not, alter government policy on petrol through blockades and pickets.
The Prime Minister must decide whether to give in to public pressure and cut petrol tax or provoke another fuel blockade.
We have to win over public opinion, and I think we have to do it very, very quickly. Otherwise, the protesters will be back.
Tonight, how a people's protest brought the country to its knees. And will they do it again? It was an ordinary Thursday evening, the 7th of September, at Britain's largest oil refinery in Cheshire. Suddenly, a convoy of cars and jeeps arrived outside the gates.
There's a blockade on the Ellesmere Port refinery, and this is in retaliation for the increase or perceived increase in fuel, and to show our anger that we cannot go on any further. Farmers and the road hauliers, and I emphasise both, have come together this evening, and I think it's quite a momentous occasion.
Brinley Williams, a local farmer, led the protest. His aim to stop tankers leaving the Stanlow refinery.
Tony Blair, we told you back in May that we had troubles in the countryside. Maybe you'll listen now when we get the same effect as what's happening in France.
From these small beginnings, a few tractors and a group of 200 men outside Stanlow was to grow a protest.
You want about 20 to go with Clive up and we'll attract it up.
That protest provoked a crisis which rocked the government. It brought Britain to the brink of total shutdown, but it also attracted the biggest show of public support seen in this country for years.
It's now time to stand up and be counted. I think everybody who sat in their armchairs, it's their time to come out. It's not farmers' protest, it's not hauliers' protest, it's a coming out of everybody who's just had a belly full of being robbed by the Labour government.
Who were these people? A self-confessed group of nobodies who so dramatically captured the attention of the nation. And why were they so angry? Clive Swan, one of the key figures in the protest, farms at Mold in North Wales. Mr. Swan was first involved in direct action during the BSE protests 3 years ago. He's part of the network which then launched the blockade to protest at rising fuel prices.
Can you tell me, how much the haulage is now costing you? Because people say, well, the diesel you use on the farm, you get a tax break on, so what are you moaning about?
No, this is where the tax break stops now. This is all a bit of a Labour Party spin again. The minute they've gone on that tailboard now, this gentleman here now is on white diesel, is on proper road diesel like everybody else is using. So I'm having to pay now, through the nose basically. His costs are having to go up because it's costing him more to put fuel in that tank to take my animals to market. 3 years ago, I could haul those animals to Mull. This gentleman could take those to Mull for £4 a head. It is now £7 a head.
As the fuel prices rose over the summer, feelings in the farming community, already running high over the agricultural recession, reached boiling point. A meeting was held in the livestock ring of a North Wales market town on that Thursday evening. In front of 200 farmers and hauliers, Brindley Williams took the chair. Clive Swan was in the crowd.
The mood in the St Asaph meeting on the Thursday night was that we've had enough. We've had a bellyful. I stood in the corner and messing for a bit, and then I said that we must take action immediately tonight. The only way that anything could be done was to go somewhere there and then on that night while everybody was together and make a protest.
So you came up with the idea of going to Stanlow?
Yes.
Mike made it quite plain that you were taking on an elected government of the Crown, and that it is a very, very, very serious act that you're doing. So please, I said, if we don't have 100%, we don't go.
Half the men at Stanlow that night were hauliers, with small businesses closely linked to the farming community. Their anger had been stirred by the hikes in the price of diesel in the past year. Tony Pearce was one of the first men stopping tankers that night.
Please.
Mr. Pearce's small family business is losing out to continental companies who pay less for diesel and less road tax. A British lorry's tax disc costs nearly £4,000, 10 times more than in some European countries.
What drove us to it was the extortionate amount of tax that we're paying in the UK. As road hauliers, we just can't go on paying the amount of taxes that the government's asking from us. We can't be going every other week and asking our customers for increases. It just doesn't work like that.
The world price of crude oil has more than tripled since Labour came to power, with a knock-on effect on prices at the petrol pump. 3 years ago, a litre of unleaded fuel cost about 59p. 2 weeks ago, it was over 80p. But of the total cost, 77% is fuel duty and VAT, making it the most costly petrol in Europe. The first reaction to the most recent rise in crude oil prices came in France, where truckers and farmers delivered a very French response. They blockaded oil refineries and main roads, trapping irate motorists, amongst them British tourists.
I've always loved France, but these people, I mean, I come from the countryside and I work with the farmers. But look at this is disgraceful. We're paying a damn sight more on our fuel than these people are.
From the outset, it looked as if the French government might be forced by the protesters to cut fuel prices. People in Britain were watching closely.
It's 6 o'clock on Friday, the 8th of September. Good morning. This is Today with Edward Sturton and Sue McGregor.
The headlines: farmers and lorry drivers have been blockading an oil refinery in Cheshire.
By Friday morning, it was clear the protesters at Stanlow knew their best chance of securing public support was to stay on the right side of the law and not antagonise the police. Lorries turning up for oil were cheered when they turned around of their own accord.
Common sense was used, common sense policing. When the police made any request, we adhered to it. The police, they told us quite plain, down the line, that is the law. You are breaking it when you step over it. And we will arrest you if you break it, because that is the law of the land.
Inside the refinery, the Shell oil tankers weren't moving. Their drivers weren't prepared to pass through the gates. Petrol supplies from Stanlow had been choked off. Word was reaching Brindley Williams that the protest was spreading.
Your bloody mates have gone to Manchester and shut Manchester.
We did have people phone us who we know from around the country and said, you know, what's the score? And we just said, well, just if you've got the people and you passionately believe in what we're saying, shut it. and it just escalated. It's just like a bushfire. As once Burnley had wet the touch paper, it just spread.
That Friday night, the huge refinery at Pembroke was amongst those shut down. The protest was beginning to take on a scale undreamt of by the impromptu convoy, which had converged on Stanlow only 24 hours before.
It's about time we knuckle down and do exactly what the French have achieved.
As the weekend approached, refineries across half of Britain had been shut down, with barely a whisper of public protest or resistance. A nationwide taxpayers' protest was being forged, and the government had not yet woken up to the scale of the crisis which was looming. That night, Transport Minister Lord MacDonald dismissed French-style direct action.
There have been attempts to try and use that form of direct action here. I'm glad to say that they've flopped, and I don't believe it's the British way at all.
They failed to recognise what was actually coming in the first place. I don't think there was enough early warning systems going off, and I don't think they prioritised it. I don't think they thought, quite rightly and understandably, well, the British probably just want to talk about hospitals and schools and police officers. And yes, they do, but they also want to talk about the fuel prices, which over the last 6 months or so had rocketed.
I think what did strike people across the country as surprising was just how quickly things spread from a few isolated protests to something which amounted to a general blockade.
Yes, but it was several days before the government realised the scale of the crisis that was unfolding. Surely they should have been more on the ball.
It was a number of days before the scale of the situation became apparent, because, you know, it took time for it to develop. But a criticism that the government didn't respond quickly enough is not, I think, fair.
That Friday, only one minister, Stephen Byers, seemed aware of the problem. He started the process of getting the first emergency orders, but put the odds of needing them at only 1 in 10.
In France, farmers and lorry drivers have been lifting their blockades at petrol stations and refineries. Most of the protesters have reached agreement with the government on cutting the cost of diesel fuel.
The French government had promised Tony Blair they'd stand firm, but on Saturday they caved in. As the French backtracked, Gordon Brown in Versailles that day effectively boxed the British government in by declaring he wouldn't surrender to fuel tax protests.
And I think people also know that decisions in Britain are made in budgets. They are not made as a result of blockades.
As news of the French about-turn spread, queues were forming at British filling stations. Petrol stocks began to run down at an alarming rate. Scotland was first to run out of fuel after the giant Grangemouth refinery was closed down. The effects were felt throughout the north. Soon, garage forecourts were being closed. And now the oil companies held a full emergency meeting, but only civil servants attended for the government. Sources within the oil industry have told us those officials wanted all government involvement to be kept low profile. Attempts by oil company management to contact ministers failed.
So, Richard, tell me about the farm.
Well, it's a coastal farm.
That weekend, plans were being laid in the southwest to extend the fuel blockades. Richard Haddock's farm in Devon overlooks the English Channel. He'd been monitoring events in France.
Well, we could see what they were doing. All of a sudden, their government wanted to talk to them, and they got noticed. Something started to happen. And I think all the frustration's been pent up in this country for 2.5 years. They saw somebody do it in days over there. And I think that was the final spark to ignite it. I just want to see a much fairer system.
That Sunday morning, Richard Haddock phoned the local media to tell them that protesters would shut down the petrol refinery in Plymouth on Monday evening. It was a calculated move to provoke panic buying.
The wonderful public here in the southwest did the rest for us. They all shot out as soon as they heard, filled up their fuel tanks, filled up their jerry cans, you name it, they filled it up. And they did it for us. They emptied the southwest of fuel faster than anybody else had done in the rest of the country.
But in Downing Street, it wasn't the petrol shortages that were concerning Tony Blair. The successful bid to rescue British forces held hostage in Sierra Leone was occupying his Sunday afternoon. Meanwhile, oil companies were ringing Whitehall, still trying to reach ministers. One company chairman tried in vain to relay the message that 500 of his filling stations would soon be dry. But by late that night, the government had still not responded. On Monday, Tony Blair began a speaking tour of the North to promote new e-commerce business. The Prime Minister was in a relaxed and confident mood. First stop, Loughborough, where he was scheduled to give a speech. It was only on the train, in response to questions from the press, that Mr. Blair inserted a new paragraph into his text, referring to the fuel tax protest.
First, we cannot, and we will not, alter government policy on petrol through blockades and pickets. That is not the way to make policy in Britain, and as far as I'm concerned, it never will be.
As Mr. Blair was making his speech, the oil companies held an emergency meeting. They'd now made contact with government ministers. Rationing was on the agenda. However, sources within the industry have told us the minutes noted there was no pressure from government for any coordinated action. Throughout the afternoon, the Prime Minister received reports new protests were springing up. While he continued north, 2 Privy Councillors were quietly sent to Balmoral to meet the Queen to enact emergency powers, just in case. The Home Secretary was closeted with officials and top police chief, Sir John Evans.
The mood was one of concern that things seemed to be developing and blockades were being put in place. And I gave the assurance right then to the Home Secretary that we would not allow those to continue. Our role is clear. We have no doubt at all of the right of peaceful protest, and that is what had been happening at Stanlow.
At Stanlow, the police were trying to strike a balance between obstruction and a lawful demonstration, with growing public sympathy behind it.
I was getting information that there seemed to be some public support for what they were seeking to do, and I was monitoring that from the centre. So the relationship between the local police and the local protesters was okay, and my reports were suggesting that when the police asked them to move, that they moved. They complied with the police request, and that's what happened in the first day or two.
By that Monday evening, Richard Haddock's call to arms had brought the Catdown refinery in Plymouth to a halt. Farmers and hauliers had arrived from across the southwest.
I'm a farmer, and we aren't going to have this green and pleasant land if they don't come and help us.
We sold the last lorry 2 days ago and laid the last one off. And I've just got the one lorry to run for myself now. So basically that's the end of me now with the diesel.
Inside the Plymouth oil terminal, the tankers were staying put, as they were by now around the country.
No, get our heads down and wait and see what Mr. Blair's got to do in the morning.
As long as then their tanker drivers don't come out, then it'll be sorted out as it is as a stalemate.
Despite the presence of the police, the drivers responsible for carrying huge tankers of explosive fuels were worried. They didn't know what awaited them beyond the gates.
From the pickets, we'd been promised that there would be no intimidation, and I believe there wasn't any intimidation. But at the same time, we can't always guarantee the maverick that's out there somewhere on the road that wants to cut you up when you're driving along the road, or to drop the concrete block off the overhead gantry or whatever.
If there wasn't intimidation early on, why weren't the tankers coming out?
Because the drivers refused. And that's been a difficult thing to manage. You have to ask drivers why they refused. But there were some who were genuinely in fear, but there were others who, I believe, were not quite so genuinely in fear, but nevertheless used that as an excuse.
On Monday evening, Tony Blair faced demonstrators when he arrived in Hull on the next leg of his speaking tour. He seemed now to have focused on the fuel problem, but was still relaxed and confident.
Now that is competence, that is commitment.
The warm-up act that evening was his deputy, local MP John Prescott, whose disdain for the fuel protesters was apparent.
And I tell you what, 3 years in government, with all its difficulties, and even if the tractors are running up and down the roads, by the way, they don't pay any tax, but leaving that aside, despite all those
Mr Blair was due to go on to a dinner to celebrate John Prescott's 30 years as a Hull MP. But when angry demonstrators threatened to blockade his car, Mr Blair realised at last he was facing a potential crisis. He missed the dinner. A shaken Mr Blair now demanded to know the national situation. At last, the oil company's minutes record a lot of government pressure to get the petrol moving.
Well, I think it's the greatest of ironies, isn't it? We have a Prime Minister who for months is being told that he's out of touch. For months he's being told that he needs to get back in touch. The very moment he's actually then listening, he's talking to people around the regions, this is when obviously this starts to blow up and you realise the seriousness of it.
By this time, nearly midnight down south, the closure of the Purfleet refinery in Essex had sparked panic buying in the southeast. By nightfall, 4,000 filling stations across the country had run dry. It was only when he awoke in his Sheffield hotel on Tuesday that Mr Blair realised the scale of the crisis that was facing him. A top-secret report faxed from the Emergency Committee, COBRA, warned the situation is near breaking point and that food shortages can be expected in the next few days. It was then Mr Blair decided to cancel his tour and return immediately to London. He spent the morning closeted with police chiefs and senior ministers. He couldn't understand why the oil companies couldn't get their tankers moving. The scenes at Stanlow had left the PM bewildered. The road was clear, no obvious intimidation. So why couldn't Shell make its tankers run? Ministers were astounded to discover that Shell drivers were actually employed by someone else, the large haulage contractor P&O.
It's very difficult for you to instruct someone if you don't employ that person directly. And that's what I think represents one of the lessons that has to be learned out of this dispute. You see, we don't subcontract out our policing. We don't subcontract out our national security through the army. So why should we allow private companies to subcontract out a vital national resource?
So why then, asked the Prime Minister, weren't P&O pushing their drivers to work? Some tanker drivers appeared openly sympathetic to the aims of the protesters, fellow truckers. And as hauliers themselves, P&O would clearly benefit from any reduction in fuel taxes the protest might bring. Whatever their reasons, P&O remained tight-lipped.
I've been waiting here now in the rain at Stanlow for over 3 hours to speak to an oil tanker driver. Well, according to his union, the Transport and General Workers, he wants to tell me about what happened here at Stanlow during the protest. But I've just heard that his bosses at P&O have threatened him with the sack if he speaks to me.
The government was being told drivers wouldn't leave for fear of intimidation and safety concerns. Yet the police clearly did not see the protesters as threatening. There were rumblings by now from the unions that the policing was a far cry from the days of the miners' strike.
We don't believe that the robustness of the policing in conjunction with the laws and the regulation was all that it might well have been. But the police are the forces on the ground. They have to balance law and order, and they have to make a judgment. On some instances, I think they've got some explanation as to why they chose to be inactive rather than proactive.
If there's no law broken and people are standing aside, then they're entitled to do that. That's peaceful protest, and the law allows them to do that.
The government's frustration with the situation was compounded by the scenes coming from the picket lines. The galling sight of protesters deciding who qualified for emergency supplies of fuel.
Metropolitan Council, St Helens, caring the community. Manweb PLC Liverpool, Electrical Emergency Departments. Those in favour of it?
What right did pickets have, what right did protesters have to decide who got oil and who didn't?
We didn't stop anybody who needed oil having oil. The police had come to us and said, so-and-so old folks home, so-and-so hospital, or we need some on the forecourt for the police or the district nurses to access. And we said, as long as you've got emergency services written on the front and back of that, so everybody can see it, you have our blessings to take that load out.
By Tuesday evening, Mr. Blair was in no mood for compromise when he met the assembled press.
Let me first of all give you an update on the situation. The oil companies are agreed that they must move supplies.
Round the car radio, the protesters at Stanlow were waiting for a sign the government would listen. Instead, the speech seemed to them to throw down a challenge.
Everything is now in place to get the tankers moving, refuelling the empty stations as a priority. We hope within the next 24 hours to have the situation on the way back to normal, though it will take longer than that to be fully back to normal.
You're on the same planet as
That was like a red rag to a bull. Everybody said the same. We are now going to stick this out, even if it's for 24 hours and 1 minute, and then we will go home, just to show Mr. Blair that this is coming off the people from around the country, and this 24 hours was now Mecca for when we were going to stand down, and it wouldn't be a minute before 24 hours and 1 minute.
Roads leading to and from the Stanlow refinery complex were suddenly closed by the police. Tension began to mount. The protesters expected police riot squads to move in to get the tankers going. But what actually materialised then was something very different.
You can see there's a lot going on at present. Things are fast moving. There's a lot of media attention, a lot of public support. People are now walking down the road here to hopefully make... Just looked like Old Trafford emptying on a Saturday afternoon. The road was full of people. They were coming down to register their vote against Tony Blair, because Tony Blair had just threw the gauntlet down that I am the voice of the people and the people want their fuel. And they came down to vote that you stay there for 24 hours.
It was that miscalculation by Tony Blair which helped cement public support behind the protest. But their very success was making Clive Swan feel uneasy.
They've been brilliant. These police officers here at moments are fantastic. And for Christ's sake, I appeal to all of you to stay on the side of the roads, making a peaceful, law-abiding protest. The minute anything sparks, they'll take the bloody lot of us apart and carry us away. And that is the end of it. It doesn't take a lot for 1 or 2 people to infiltrate the crowd with their own political agendas and throw the first brick. And once that first brick had been thrown, the whole thing would have been taken apart. The writing was then on the wall that this has now got too political and far too popular and too big.
As Wednesday dawned, the fuel shortage was really biting. The motorways of Britain were almost deserted. The screw was turned further as lorries blockaded Park Lane in the heart of London. Only now did the government begin to get a grip, agreeing a plan with the oil companies to supply 300 petrol stations for essential users. And on the political front, they launched a 2-pronged attack, on the tanker drivers and on the protesters. The weapon they chose was the NHS.
Thanks very much for coming. I have with me Neil Mackay, the Acting Chief Executive of the National Health Service.
Health Secretary Alan Milburn announced he'd had to bring in emergency measures, in effect to put the NHS on red alert, because of fuel shortages caused by the protest.
The reality out there is that essential NHS services are being hit hard. There is only one way for the threat now to be lifted.
From NHS patients. The oil companies must now step up deliveries. The drivers should drive. The blockaders should go home. They need to know the impact that their actions are having on NHS patients and NHS services. They have made their point, but enough is enough.
Mr. Milburn painted a dire picture, but as he spoke, tankers with emergency supplies for the NHS were leaving Stanlow, as they had done all along. And now top health officials were seen at several protest sites. The North West's Public Health Director, John Ashton, tackled Brindley Williams.
You need to look in the mirror and see what you're doing.
All health authorities that have made requests to Shell have had exactly what they have been wanted.
Pharmacy, community nurses, social workers.
May I see your documentation to the contrary, sir? Because if we
I can tell you, we have set up a crisis centre for the region, exactly the same as we would for a terrorist incident. That's the severity of what's going on.
Can determine whether hospitals or ambulance services.
Later in the day, protesters heard the Prime Minister broadcast the starkest message yet to the British public.
Lives are at risk if these people cannot get to work.
Delegates, we will continue.
While the government attacked the protesters in public, behind the scenes, old allies were being called upon to help. At the TUC Congress, Bill Morris, leader of the Transport and General Workers, which represent the tanker drivers, came up with a new strategy. He sent two of his most trusted senior officials to meet drivers face-to-face at Grangemouth.
Our calculation was that Grangemouth was key. It served Scotland, and in our judgment, if we managed to secure the support and cooperation of the drivers in Grangemouth, the visual effect of tankers moving out there would have, with the same direct intervention, planning into Thursday, Friday, and perhaps Saturday, would have created the domino effect and seek to influence drivers elsewhere in the country.
At Grangemouth, the union officials found the drivers adamant their fears were real.
It only takes one lunatic to drop a brick off a flyover. Danny. And my son's without a father.
In their house, one night when I'm down here.
The meeting lasted for 5 hours, and eventually a solution was hammered out and presented to the police.
Where the drivers wanted police officers to accompany them, that was agreed, and in some of the where they didn't, then rather than going out single crewed, that just one driver, we doubled up and we would have two drivers, and where an escort was required so that when they get to the point of delivery, because this was part of the problem, all the focus about intimidation was at the refinery, but a lot of the abuse and the intimidation took place at the point of delivery where there were no cameras.
The Grangemouth blueprint of police protection was adopted now at all refineries. The protesters could only watch as in the early hours tankers began to roll. From Plymouth to Scotland and Pembroke to the Midlands. Britain's oil depots were opening up as a result of newfound resolution all round. The TUC had earned the gratitude of Labour, but it was not without its costs. There was anger amongst some tanker drivers. Mick Diaper, the Plymouth shop steward, was incensed.
This is my shop steward's credentials, and I feel that they've let me down by coming involved in this. So therefore, that's all I can do. I'm going to quit the union. I was angry, very, very angry. I felt that this dispute was not a trade union dispute, and there was no reason for the trade unions to intervene and for them to actually send communiques around to all the terminals asking the drivers, the union men, to cross these pickets, I think was absolutely wrong. And I felt that the union leaders, the TUC council, had taken this decision more for their own political ends than for a safety reason in support of their own drivers.
Some of your members say that you were seen to be sucking up to government and helping government to the detriment perhaps of people who are out for a peaceful protest.
Well, I don't, the government wouldn't accept that, and I certainly
Would you
don't
accept it?
that. No, I was protecting my members, I was protecting some of the values that we hold dear in this society.
At Stanlow in the early hours of Thursday, while exhausted pickets slept, the leaders decided to end the protest on their own terms. They were worried that responsibility for a hospital death would soon be laid at their door, destroying the overwhelming public support. It was an emotional moment.
But lads, we stand here, and let's bloody well, if we've got to finish this, and it's ripping the guts out. I never thought that I'd say, I told you we stay here till the end. It looks like the end's about to come. But meeting's over, gents. God bless you all.
The decision was made that it would be better sooner than later because of what I and the others thought would happen. That by lunchtime, that this would be smashed and it would be totally discredited. And the whole week's work would have gone down the pan for nothing. All those good people coming to support it would have been totally discredited.
So you decided to quit while you were ahead?
Quit while we were ahead, but also to tell the government that 60 days you have got.
That was the sting in the tail. A 60-day deadline for the government to reduce fuel taxes. It was another canny move, deliberately timed to coincide with the Chancellor's November budget statement. As Stanlow returns to normal, the political fallout from the protest has become all too clear. The Labour Party gathering in Brighton this week faces a dramatic fall in the government's popularity, overtaken for the first time in 8 years by the Tories. Mr Blair is adopting a more conciliatory tone, but the message that's still coming from the government is that tax cuts in petrol can only be achieved by cuts in funding schools and hospitals. A sceptical public hasn't bought it, and there are ominous signs of unrest on Labour's normally compliant backbenches.
I think the government needs to learn the lesson that you can't kid the British people. They can see through that. And that when we've got record investment, £43 billion over the next 3 years, going into public services, which we're very proud of, there is money clearly there.
Will you cut fuel taxes?
I've said this will be a matter that will be decided in the pre-budget reports and in the budget, and these decisions on revenues will be weighed with all the relevant considerations, of course listening to what the people have been saying. But you know, the test of listening is not whether you do exactly what the protesters want. The test of listening is whether you're taking all the relevant considerations into account. As Gordon Brown has made clear, that's what we'll do, but we'll do it on the normal budget timetable. We will not be bullied by blockades or by arbitrary ultimatums.
What about the threat, though, that 60 days and counting, they will be back, possibly?
Well, I think it's outrageous for protesters to make, you know, that kind of an ultimatum.
Queenie, come on.
So you breed these ponies?
Yes,
Brindley Williams is back on his farm in Wales, trying to pick up his normal life. He rejects the notion that he's holding the government to ransom.
You can't simply turn a government out in mid-office. That isn't my agenda.
Yeah, but some people think it's come very close to that.
Well, if it has, well, there must be something wrong. But I have not gone out simply to do that. There is no hidden forces. I've got to go back to normal for my own sanity.
But Mr Williams still insists there must be significant cuts in fuel tax. Will a cut of a couple of pence in the price of petrol, the tax level, be enough?
I don't think a couple of pence will be. What we want is parity with Europe. I'm not even going to enter into guessing a figure that would be acceptable because I don't have the authority. I simply don't have the authority.
No, but you have the power, potentially, to call people out again. Will a couple of pence be derisory as far as you're concerned?
I personally, and I emphasise I personally, I think it is totally derisory, a couple of pence.
There's an awful lot said.
A group of protesters who came down from the hills and the fields of North Wales and tapped into the public mood are not yet satisfied. The government knows the clock is ticking.
I am fearful that those protesters will lose patience. I think we have to demonstrate that we do something, we have to win over public opinion, and I think we have to do it very, very quickly. Otherwise, the protesters will be back.
If you want to comment on the issues raised in this programme, you can visit our website at www.bbc.co.uk/Panorama. Next week on Panorama, the new secret weapon in Britain's war on drugs.
As the country sleeps, there's a team hard at work.
Sophie, these early mornings.
You'll get used to it.
Yeah.
Seeking out the stories.
What time's the Washington feed?
6 o'clock.
Searching out the people.
OK, I'll be down in a moment.
Checking all the angles and the facts.
Have you got the script for the headlines?
Quietly working behind the scenes.
Good morning and welcome to breakfast.
Starts next Monday on BBC One and BBC News 24.
Writer Will Self getting passionate with Paul Merton in Room 101. That's in 40 minutes on BBC One, after a new series following the people who get a buzz out of living extreme lives.